Welcome back to Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Lindsay-Michele. This is the space where I share the reality of my own abuse and healing journey, but we go deeper than just the story. I talk about the biology of what trauma actually does to our brains and bodies, because I've learned that once you understand the nervous system, you stop blaming yourself for how you survived. So if that sounds like the answers you've been looking for, make sure you're subscribed. All right, let's get into it.
Before we get started, I just wanted to share a quick disclaimer. This podcast is based on my personal experiences and what I've lived through. Some episodes include difficult topics like trauma and abuse that may be triggering for some listeners. If you need support, I've included resources in the episode description. All stories are shared from my perspective, and names, identities, and specific details have been changed or removed to protect the privacy of those involved. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. My goal is to help others feel seen, raise awareness, and remind anyone listening that they are not alone.
So I've been sitting with something lately. It's not loud, and it didn't come crashing down on a Tuesday afternoon like a panic attack. It wasn't an explosion. It's not in the spiraling or even in the breaking down. It was just like noticing it quietly, almost like noticing a crack in the wall that's been there for years, but the light just hit it just right for the first time. I realized I'm more tired of explaining myself than I am of being misunderstood. And that feels new for me. It surprised me how settled that realization felt. It wasn't relieving, not heavy, just solid. Like something finally locked into place after being loose for so long. Because for most of my life, explaining myself wasn't optional. It wasn't a choice I made during conversations. It was how I stayed safe. It was how I survived. If I could just explain my heart well enough, I thought maybe I wouldn't be hurt. If I could just narrate my intentions clearly enough, maybe I wouldn't be punished. Explaining wasn't about the clarity. It was about control. If I could stay ahead of other people's reactions, I believed I could avoid the fallout. If I could soften things fast enough, smooth things out quickly enough, or maybe nothing would turn on me. Abuse taught me how to be digestible. It taught me how to read the room before I even entered it. Before I ever realized that's what I was doing, before it had a name, before it felt like anything other than instinct, I learned how to listen to the sound of a key in the lock to know what kind of mood was on the other side of that door, how to scan faces for micro expressions that signaled danger, how to adjust my tone, my energy, my needs before I even took my coat off. How to become whoever that moment required so nothing escalated. And this wasn't strategy. It wasn't something I planned. It was automatic. My body was doing math faster than my mind ever could. I learned early that being fully myself wasn't the safest option. Being myself was risky. Being myself was loud. Being myself took up space that I wasn't sure I was allowed to have. There was no permission slip for that kind of existence. No evidence it would be tolerated. So I learned to stay just inside the lines of what felt acceptable. So I became flexible, adaptable, easy. I became water, taking the shape of whatever container I was poured into. Not because I wanted to disappear, but because disappearing worked. And people praised me for it. They called me understanding, or you're so chill, empathetic, low maintenance, strong. And at the time, those words landed like approval. Like proof I was doing something right. Like confirmation that the smaller I became, the safer I was. But what they were really responding to was how little space I took up. They weren't praising my personality. They were praising my silence. They were praising the fact that I didn't require them to stretch or change or accommodate a human being with needs of her own. They didn't have to meet me anywhere uncomfortable because I was already there waiting. And I need to be clear about where this started. This didn't begin with romantic relationships or a bad upbringing. I feel like a lot of people always think it starts with a bad boyfriend or a toxic partner or a bad childhood upbringing. But the roots go even deeper. I was sexually assaulted in high school. And that sentence alone still carries weight in my body no matter how many years have passed. I was only 14 years old. And when that happens at that age, when you're still forming, it doesn't hurt you. It teaches your body something without your permission. It rewires the hardwire of your nervous system. It becomes a baseline. A reference point you don't even know you're using. It taught my body that safety came from compliance. It taught me that fighting was dangerous, that saying no was a trigger for violence, that being agreeable mattered more than being honest, that freezing, adapting, staying quiet felt safer than asserting myself. That lesson didn't stay in the past. It embedded itself. I didn't walk away from that thinking I was traumatized. I didn't have that language yet. I walked away thinking, this is how you survive. You make yourself small. You make yourself soft. You make sure you don't have any sharp edges that might provoke someone. That belief didn't feel tragic at the time. It felt practical. And without realizing it, that's when I started becoming digestible. Not consciously, not deliberately, not in a way that ever felt like a decision. At first, it showed up in ways that look harmless. It looked like being a good friend. With friends, I was easy, funny, the one who didn't make things awkward, the one who fit in anywhere. I learned how to stay agreeable even when something felt off, how to move on quickly, how to smooth discomfort before it had a chance to breathe. If the group wanted to go left, I went left. If the group wanted to go right, I went right. If someone made a joke at my expense, I laughed the loudest so no one would think I was sensitive. I thought that's just who I was. I told myself I was just a go-with-the-flow type of person. I didn't realize that go with the flow had quietly replaced go with myself. But something had already shifted inside of me. I wasn't flowing. I was dissolving. I was learning how to shape myself around other people's comfort long before I understood what it was costing me. There's no moment of loss. It was just erosion. So when I later landed myself in my first abusive relationship, that groundwork was already there. Not because I chose it, not because I was broken, but because my nervous system had already learned to confuse safety with disappearing. That pattern felt familiar long before it felt dangerous. When I met someone who demanded that I erased myself, it felt familiar. It felt like home. Not a safe home, but a known home. And once I learned that, it didn't stay contained. You can't quarantine a trauma response. You can't tell it to only show up in one area of your life. So I became digestible everywhere, not in a way that I could even point to, not in a way that felt like a choice. It wasn't something I noticed even happening. It was something I realized only after I was completely gone. There was no moment where I thought, I'm changing myself, or there was no alarm bells that were going off warning me. There was no comparison point. It wasn't a behavior that I was even performing. It was an identity. I was living inside. Like, it was just who I became. It felt normal. It felt like adulthood. It felt like I was being functional. And nobody asked me to stop because nothing looked wrong. It worked. I was functional. I was likable. I was capable. I was easy. And when something works, no one questions the cost, not even the person who's paying it. At work, I was whoever they needed me to be. The employee who never said no, who stayed late. I allowed my loyalty to become a slavery. I didn't experience that as people-pleasing. I experienced it as being competent, reliable, the one who could handle things without making it complicated. In my home life, I smoothed things over and swallowed my needs. I became the thermostat for everyone else's emotions, constantly adjusting myself to keep it steady. I wasn't trying to control the room. I was trying to prevent a fallout. If everyone else was okay, I told myself I was okay too. With acquaintances, I was agreeable. With strangers, I was polite, accommodating, small. It didn't matter who was in front of me. My body defaulted to, how do I fit in here? Before, how do I feel here? I learned how to read people fast, super fast. I could assess what someone wanted from me within seconds. How to adjust myself just enough to avoid tension. How to disappear in ways nobody even noticed. I didn't even notice I was doing it. That speed, it didn't feel impressive. It felt necessary, like reflex, like breathing. I became a master of being present without actually being there. So I'd be physically in the room, but mentally elsewhere. Emotionally muted just enough to stay functional. And that's the part that's so hard to explain. When you live like that, it feels normal. It feels like maturity. It feels like being good with people. It doesn't feel like loss while it's happening. It feels like you're adapting. You think you're just empathetic. You think you're observant. But you don't realize that your awareness is coming from hypervigilance. That your intuition that you used to have, like such a strong intuition, it actually is now your nervous system scanning for a threat. And I feel like nobody really tells you that kind of condition doesn't stay in one place. It doesn't just live in one relationship. It bleeds into everything. It seeps into how you order your food, how you get dressed, how you speak, how you breathe. It becomes the background setting of your life. Not dramatic. It's not obvious. Just it's always on. Until one day, you look around and realize you've been digesting yourself down for years. Not just for partners, but for everyone. Not consciously, not with resentment, just quietly, automatically, over time. And somewhere along the way, you go missing. Not in a way that anyone else can point to. but in a way you feel when you're finally still. There's a version of me that a lot of people got used to. I can feel her sometimes, just standing literally right behind me, not haunting me, not pulling me back, just existing there quietly like muscle memory. The version who anticipated reactions before they happened, who could sense disappointment before it was even spoken, who can feel tension before it even had a name. The version who explained herself before anyone even asked, offering defense for shit she didn't even do. I could hear myself talking and realize I was already justifying something no one even questioned yet. Already softening, or already preparing to be misunderstood and trying to prevent it with evidence. The version who smoothed tension over so nobody had to feel uncomfortable. Who absorbed the awkwardness or who carried emotional weight that wasn't even mine because it felt easier than letting it land where it belonged. And that version of me wasn't fake. And I want to honor that version of me because it was real. That version of me was doing exactly what she learned to do. She was working overtime to keep me safe. She wasn't weak. She was trained. She was responding to a world that taught her it was safer to adapt than to resist. But over time, something started to happen. Not suddenly, slowly. I was being broken down into bite-sized pieces, small enough for everyone else to swallow. Not threatening, just easy to handle. I wasn't being rejected, I was being consumed. Like fucking baby food. Nothing required chewing, nothing required effort. No pushback, no friction, no acknowledgement that there was a whole person behind what was being taken. And the more I adapted, the less I existed. And nobody else noticed. It was in a way that lived entirely inside of me. Until one day I realized I had no idea who I was anymore. And it wasn't because I changed once. It was because I'd been changing consistently. I knew who people wanted me to be. I knew who I needed to be in different rooms. I could feel the shift happen automatically depending on who was in front of me. I knew how to respond. I knew how to adjust. I knew how to be liked. I knew how to survive interactions. But just being, without a prompt, without an audience, that became unfamiliar. That it felt unstructured. It felt unsafe. I felt like I was an imposter inside of my own skin. Like I was wearing myself instead of inhabiting myself. I would sit alone in my car and I would feel like this panic rising because I didn't know what shape to be when there was no container to pour myself into. No cues, no expectations, nobody to read, just me and no instructions. Abuse doesn't just hurt you. It slowly teaches you how to leave yourself. It teaches you self-abandonment as a survival strategy. Not in a dramatic decision either. And it's not in a way you could trace back to a single moment, but in repetition, in patterns, in conditioning. Every time I overrode my instincts to keep the peace, every time I felt a no rising in my throat and I swallowed it down to smile instead, every time I said the thing that would keep the peace instead of the thing that was actually happening inside of me. And every time I became who someone else needed instead of who I was, those moments didn't feel like loss while they were happening. They felt like relief, like avoidance, like choosing the option that hurt less or felt safe in that moment. I was leaving bit by bit, piece by piece. Just enough that each time to get through whatever was in front of me, that eventually there was almost nothing left to explain because there was barely anyone left inside doing the explaining. I wasn't empty in this dramatic way. I was empty in a quiet way. The kind it doesn't alarm anybody else. So when I say I got tired of explaining myself, this is what I mean. I wasn't tired of conversations. I wasn't tired of talking. I was tired of disappearing. I was tired of watching myself step back while somebody else stepped forward. Tired of negotiating my presence. Tired of translating myself into something smaller so I wouldn't be the problem. I was tired of the act of translation, translating my soul into a language that wouldn't upset anyone. I was tired of turning myself into something smaller so other people would stay comfortable. I was tired of narrating my existence so it could be approved by a bunch of people who didn't even really see me. I was exhausted from living as a version of myself that required consistent monitoring. Always checking, always adjusting, and always editing. And I realized something extremely uncomfortable. Something that made my stomach turn for the first time I admitted it to myself. Something that I resisted for a long time because it changed how I had to see my past. As long as I kept explaining myself, people felt entitled to access me. My explanations became invitations. Every explanation opened a door. Every clarification gave someone a foothold. When I explained why I was hurt, I was inviting them to tell me why I shouldn't be. When I explained why I said no, it was inviting them to convince me to say yes. I wasn't setting boundaries. I was basically submitting them for review. My clarifications became negotiations. I was putting my boundaries up for debate. I was handing everybody else a gavel and asking them to rule on my feelings. I was outsourcing my authority and calling it communication. My inner world became something other people felt allowed to weigh in on. And I let it happen. They felt allowed to edit me, to critique me, to tell me I was too sensitive, too loud, too much, or not enough, not worth it. And the worst part, it was how normal that felt, how familiar it was. So when I stopped doing that, it felt like betrayal. I felt like I was betraying them, not even myself. Because everybody else was used to that access. They were used to me explaining my way into agreement. To the people who were used to holding that gavel, my silence felt like a riot to them. They looked at me like I broke a contract that I never actually knowingly signed. To me, it felt like relief. It felt like the first fucking deep breath I had taken in 20 years. Not peace, not ease, just air. There was a grief in that shift. I don't want to lie and say it was just freedom, because it was heavy too. It wasn't loud grief, but it was this quiet type. The kind that it settles in slowly and it stays. It was grief for the relationships that only worked when I was easy. There was no dramatic endings, not explosive breakups, just a slow understanding that some connections required me to disappear to survive. And I had to face that hurt, that some people only loved me because I was a mirror, because I reflected what they needed, because I didn't interrupt their world with my own. It was grief for the rooms where I used to fold myself to fit, where I made myself smaller without being asked, where I learned how to exist sideways so I wouldn't take up too much space. Sometimes I didn't lose people in a blow up. There was no argument, no confrontation. There was no even clear ending. And I think a lot of times we think boundaries always end in screaming matches or disagreements, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just end in silence. Some of the times I just stopped shrinking. I just stood up and into my full weight. I stopped editing my sentences. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain it. I just didn't compress myself anymore. And where I was, the room, it would go quiet. Not hostile, not angry. It was just different. And the dynamic shifted. It was in that silence I saw who was actually there for me and who was just there for the convenience of me. Who stayed when I stopped watering myself down? Who drifted when there was nothing left to take? For a long time, I believed that if I could find the right words, people would finally understand me. I thought if I could just say it differently, if I could just explain the contents, if I just show them my heart, I believed the misunderstanding was my fault. That clarity was something I didn't earn yet. That if I worked harder at explaining, things would finally settle. I believed that if I explained myself clearly enough, gently enough, with enough context, everything would smooth out. I thought I could explain my way into safety. I thought safety lived on the other side of being understood. I thought if someone really got it, they wouldn't hurt me. But understanding never actually made me feel safe. I've had people understand me perfectly and still hurt me. I've had people understand my boundaries and still cross them. I've had people repeat my words back to me and then ignore them anyway. I've had people nod in agreement and then do exactly what they wanted to do. Alignment did. And those are not the same thing at all. Understanding is intellectual. Alignment is behavioral. People can understand your story and still prefer the version of you that didn't take up space. They can understand why you are the way you are and still wish you were quieter. People can understand your pain and still expect you to stay digestible because it makes their life easier and more comfortable. Because understanding doesn't require change, but alignment does. At first, choosing not to explain, it felt like wrong, utterly wrong in my body. It felt physically dangerous. not emotionally uncomfortable. It literally felt dangerous. My heart would race, my palms would sweat, my under eyes would pulsate. My body reacted like I had done something reckless. I would stay quiet in moments where I would have filled space. I would let people misunderstand me, and I'd let a silence hang in the air without rushing to fix it. And I'd feel that urge to jump in, to clean it up, just smooth it over. And I would have to force myself not to do that. I'd have to literally sit there and resist that urge to soften or clarify or add an LOL at the end of a text to show I wasn't mad. I'd have to sit with that discomfort instead of anesthetizing it. I don't know how to explain it. But my body, it would panic. My nervous system, it would scream. You got, in newer houses with the fire alarms, how obnoxious they are. They're yelling at you. They're like, fire, fire, fire. That's literally what I would feel like inside of my body. And I still do from time to time. It's wild. But silence used to mean consequences. Silence used to mean something bad was coming. Silence meant danger. It was the calm before the storm. And my body, it didn't know the difference yet. But when nothing would happen and there was no explosion or punishment, when nobody yelled at me or nobody left or nobody came for me or nobody physically assaulted me, the world didn't end. That was information for my body. Some people adjusted. They stepped up. They met me in that honest place that I was in. They didn't need me to explain myself because they were already aligned with me. Some people drifted. They fell away because there was nothing left for them to consume from me. They weren't angry. They were just uninterested. And that showed me everything I needed to see. Not even about them, but about me. That's where the real shift happened. It was not all at once. It was not in a way that it made me feel brave or empowered in the moment. I stopped needing to be understood by everybody. Not because I stopped caring, but because I finally noticed how much it cost me. I realized that being misunderstood is not a fatality. It's just a side effect of having a point of view. A side effect of existing as a full person instead of a shapeshifter. I stopped managing other people's comfort at the expense of my own presence. I stopped pre-softening my words. I stopped rehearsing conversations before they happened. Stopped scanning for reactions while I was still speaking. I decided that if someone is uncomfortable with my truth, that's their own load to carry, not mine. I had spent fucking years, carrying everybody else's discomfort around me like it was my responsibility, like it was proof of my goodness. I stopped offering versions of myself that required me to disappear. And I didn't announce it. I didn't explain it. I didn't justify it. I just stopped fucking doing it. What replaced that wasn't peace, though. I feel like peace feels like, to me, I envision a calm lake, still and just calm. This felt more like a mountain for me. It was solid. on moving. It was just, I did not asking for permission to exist. It was steadiness. It was less noise. It was less performance, less self-abandonment, less apologizing for taking up space, less questioning my own reactions, less checking in with everyone else before checking in with myself. I wasn't feeling guilty all the time anymore. I wasn't waking up with that heavy dread in my chest. I wasn't bracing for the day before it even started. I wasn't already tired of myself before I even opened my eyes. And there's a sentence that I constantly keep coming back to. It's become a mantra, a prayer. It's something I say often. And I don't owe anyone the version of me that they preferred. Not the one who stayed quiet to keep the peace. Not the one who swallowed discomfort to make things easier. Not the one who survived by disappearing. Not the quieter one. Not the more agreeable one. Not the one who survived by shrinking. She kept me alive. She learned quickly and she adapted perfectly. She did exactly what she needed to do in environments she was in. She got me through the nights that I didn't think I was going to survive. She got me through the days where I felt invisible. But that version of me, she doesn't get to run my life anymore. Although she's a survivor, but that version of me is dead now. And she could rest. And if you're listening and something in this feels tense, this might be why. Not because anything here is new information, but because something in your body recognizes it. Because there's a difference between understanding something and realizing you've been living it. If you feel a resistance to this, pay attention to it. Not to fix it, not to analyze it, just to notice it. You're not becoming colder. You're not becoming difficult. You're not losing yourself. You're not failing at being easy. And you're not doing something wrong even. You're meeting yourself without survival running the show. Without that constant internal negotiation. Without the reflex it's like a reflex to adjust before you even feel what you need to feel. You're meeting the person who lives underneath the trauma response. The one who exists when they aren't bracing. The one who doesn't need to earn safety. And that changes how the people around you experience you. Because you're no longer editing yourself in real time. Because your presence isn't filtered through appeasement. It changes the texture of your spirit. You aren't soft putty anymore. You're solid. And not in a rigid way. You're not closed. You're grounded. And some relationships, they won't survive that. Not because of conflict or the drama, but because the dynamic they relied on no longer exists. And you're not wrong. It's because they were built on access to a version of you that no longer exists. A version that bent automatically, that you explained yourself before being asked to. A version that it disappeared quietly. They were built on the premise that you would always yield. And now that you're standing firm, that structure of that relationship collapses. And that hurts. It hurts in a way, like, it isn't loud. It's in a way that doesn't look like anger. It hurts in the letting go. I won't pretend it doesn't. And I want to say it's okay to grieve that without turning it into self-blame. It's okay to miss people who only knew you when you were smaller. It's okay to miss the version of you that made things easier too. It's okay to, it's honestly, and I feel like this one is a big one. It's okay to miss people who even hurt you, or the people who were bad for you. It's okay to miss the ease of being small. We're told that growth makes life lighter right away. We see the highlight reels of healing and the glow ups, the before and afters, the clean narratives where everything suddenly makes sense. But for me, growth mostly made things clearer, not gentler, for sure, not easier, but definitely clearer. I could see where I've been bending consistently throughout my life. I could see the contortions I'd put myself through just to be loved. The small adjustments that didn't feel like sacrifices at the time. The way I learned to move before anyone asked me to. Where I'd been disappearing over time. It was like slowly enough that I didn't even notice the absence until it was a complete absence. How much of my identity had been shaped around being safe for other people. And not safe as in like a protected, safe and non-disruptive, easy to be around. Once I saw that, I saw it everywhere throughout the last 20 years of my life. It wasn't an awakening moment either. It was a permanent shift in my awareness. I couldn't go back to sleep after that. I couldn't unknow what my body had been doing for decades. I couldn't pretend I hadn't been playing with myself. So, I guess if you feel quieter now, if your circle feels smaller, if you feel less interested in explaining yourself, if the urge to defend your existence quieted down, or if conversations are getting shorter, if your tolerance for over-explaining is gone, that doesn't mean something is wrong. It doesn't mean that you're isolating or you're hardening. It might mean you're finally living inside your own skin without needing permission or without narrating your way into safety. It might mean you finally decided to occupy the space that belongs to you. And I don't need to be digestible to be worthy. I don't need to be smaller to be safe. I don't need to be quieter to be kept. I don't need to be easy to swallow. I don't need to be softened so someone else doesn't choke on my truth. I don't need to be convenient to be loved. Love that only works when I disappear isn't love. It's access. I don't need to be understood by anybody to be real. I don't need a consensus or approval. I don't owe anyone a version of me that existed only to survive. That version started forming at 14 when somebody decided my consent was unneeded and did what they wanted anyway. That was the moment my body learned that what survival required. She was formed in fear and was shaped by what I had to do to stay alive. I'm not here to be consumed anymore. I'm not here to be preceded or managed or made easier for somebody else to handle. I'm done cutting myself into bite-sized pieces for people who refuse to chew. I'm done pre-digesting myself so no one has to do any work. I'm here to be aligned with my body, aligned with my truth, aligned with parts of me that don't need translation. And if that means some people don't recognize me, that's okay. They knew a version of me that was surviving, not the one that's living. If they look at me and say, "You've changed," I say thank you. Because change it's the proof that I stopped fucking disappearing. They don't have to recognize me. They never really saw me anyway. But I finally do. And that's enough for me. So I'm not ending this with clarity. I'm ending with presence. There isn't a moral to pull from this, really. There isn't a takeaway to package, or there isn't a version of me standing at the end of this story who has it all figured out. There's just somebody who finally stopped negotiating her own existence. That's it. I'm not here to convince anyone of what I lived. I'm not here to translate my nervous system into something easier to digest. I'm not here to make my story comfortable. I know what shaped me, and I know what it cost. I know what it took to stop disappearing. And that's enough for me. If something in this unsettled you, sit with that. If something in this felt familiar, you're not alone in that. And if something in this made you uncomfortable, that's allowed. I'm not asking to be understood. I'm not offering closure. I'm not shrinking this down to end on a clean note. I'm no longer shrinking to be digestible. And for the first time, that feels honest.